What's up? Nothing. I was just sitting here messing around with, the studio and whatnot, and I don't know. I was just bored, I guess. There is no topic. That's why there's no topic. There's no, we didn't, I didn't even, there we go. I didn't even make a thumbnail. I'll make a thumbnail later, depending on what we talk about. Let's see if I can even get this chat working. Oh. What's up, Panic? There we go. Chat's working. Thoughts on a one-page mega game competition between your Patreons? You mean like everyone submits a one-pager? That'd be interesting. Hey, look at that, Keith. Good timing. What wonderful timing. Excellent timing, you could argue. Tomorrow I'm running the climatic. You know what? I came live because Pumpkin's working. That's what I did. Or maybe you're not working. You're just up. Panic is running the climatic city siege section of Red Hand of Doom. Very exciting. I believe that is chapter 4, correct? Technically, I don't want to spoil anybody. I mean, it's a 20-year-old adventure, right? Technically, the finale is after the siege of Brindle, right? How I remember that, I don't even remember. That even the city's name is Brindle. That's gross that I could remember that. And then you go fight. Okay, hold on a sec. Then you go fight the champion of Tiamat, who is the leader of the Kulkor Zol, and his name is he's like a half goblin, half dragon cleric, favored soul, maybe, I think, of Tiamat. That might be it, Sapphire. I think it is like, I was going to say it's like Azerian, but you're right. I think Azar Cole or Azar Call or something sounds about right. But I remember the name of the hobgoblins, they're called the Kulkor Zol or something like that. And look at that. Hi, Wormlord Azar Cole, indeed. Very edgy. The chat seems off. Why does the chat seem off? Oh, because it's not capturing everybody's chat. Yeah, I don't know. It might just be capturing like the top chat or something. Let me see. Yeah, I don't know. Something. I mean, I use different settings, so maybe you have to be some I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what's going on, but it seems to be all right. No, I am working. Okay, which is ironically when I'm at my most free to participate in the streams. Right. Good stuff, Pumpkin. Hello from Minnesota. Hello, what's up? I know. Well, I said I could go live right now. I have nothing to talk about. I was just sitting here bored. And, I got up late. And late, not that bad, but it's just been weird. It's that weird time of year. I don't know. How interesting. Although I can't imagine that running at Neberon really makes that big of a difference, right? I mean, it's kind of just whatever, I've only run it once. I'm trying to remember what my party was. There was a cleric fighter, dwarf cleric fighter. There was a human druid. There was a half-orc barbarian. There was some sort of elven ranger. And I think we had a 5th character. But I think they dropped out of the campaign. So those are only 4 I remember. But it was a good party. Druid did a lot of work at that party. Let's talk about designing a true CAS game. Yeah, I mean, the problem, Pumpkin, is that if you design a true CAS game, oh, I see why the chat's messed up. Okay, I gotcha. Now I see what you mean. There we go. Now we're working. Now we're cooking. The problem with creating a true CAS game is as you move more and more towards CAS, so CAS is combat as sport. So we talk about, this is a terminology that's been around for a long time, but Knights Last Call uses a lot. But right, we've got combat as war and combat as sport. Recently, we have started talking about CAC. I think is the term that we've used. There was some debate about should it be CAC or CAT, which is like combat as cinema, combat as theater. And if you think about it, actually, it really makes a lot of sense. Now, I mean, I don't know. Maybe someone brought this up, but you know what? Fuck it. It's late night. We'll get the whiteboard out. I did buy a new whiteboard. This is not my new whiteboard, but I did buy a new whiteboard. What's up, Andy? Glad to have you here, buddy. Sit over here. Of course, Derek was looking at Wilderfeast because that's all I do now. That's not true, but okay. Let me get the whiteboard up here real quick. Do we have a thing for the whiteboard? We do have a thing for the whiteboard. Boom, there we go. All right. Why is that there? Take away an opportunity permanently. Did I just click that? What is that? Okay. I don't even know where that where is that text coming from? There we go. Okay. Well, welcome, Andy. I'm glad you're here. So what I was going to say was, I think we should. I feel stupid for not having thought about this a long time ago. But one of the things that we've talked a lot. And now, again, a lot of people like to shit on this, and rightfully so, because the original concept of GNS is kind of a really flawed concept, honestly. But one of the things that I think is important to note is that the way that I use combat, or the way that I use GNS, is different than the way that they used GNS back in the day, and it's different than the way that a lot of people refer to it. I kind of use it, sort of my own way, if you will. And so, yeah. Anyways, but one of the things that we've talked about before. So the original idea of GNS, which was created in the Forge back in the late '90s, which kind of was the people who ended up creating like Apocalypse World and all that other stuff, was this idea that it was around like the idea that you could have a gamist game and a narrativist game and a simulationist game, and their belief structure was that those things could not be the same thing. Right? Like you could only be fulfilling, or I should say, let me rephrase it this way. It was like, why do you play RPGs? I should actually even refer to it like that. So their idea was behind the motivation, okay? The why. Why do you play role-playing games? And their belief was that you either play role-playing games because, you want to crush your enemies and see them driven before you, because you want to, drink deep and simulate some fake reality, or because you want to create stories and have fun, and tell stories or whatever and be really narrative. So their belief structure was that you can be one of those, and their primary reason and their GNS theory was around this idea of why do people play RPGs? What is it that they are looking for? And Pumpkin, the closest analog to this, right? Is Timmy, Johnny, and Spike, which gets to the idea of like, why do you play Magic the Gathering? What is it that you're hoping to get out of this experience? And so naturally, I think there's a very there's a lot of analog between these two ideas. Obviously, in fact, I think Timmy, Jimmy, Johnny's, and Spikes have been around for a long time. So those ideas might have been kind of percolating at the same time. Who knows? Okay, so that's the Forge's definition. What I do is I don't really look at why do you play RPGs. That's not how I use the GNS concept. Instead, I look at mechanics, okay, inside of a game. And I believe that there are gamist mechanics, that there are narrativist mechanics, and that there are simulationist mechanics. Now, this has little to do with your motivation for why you play RPGs. And in fact, it has little to do with the system as a whole. And it certainly isn't restricted to just one of the three, the way that original idea was presented. Instead, I think that many games have a variety of different mechanics. And I think that depending on what it is that you're hoping to get out of an RPG, that different mechanics serve you in a better, different way. Like there's almost, and again, this idea that people mistake narrativism for telling a story. And the way I think of narrativist mechanics is they are mechanics that are put specifically in the game. I will even say meta mechanics, so that they create what I will call, cinematic moments and, moments of dramatic impact. Things like fate points and to a certain extent, even certain meta currencies, right? Because you're the hero, and it's kind of like a form of plot armor. You could even argue that in some ways, HP is kind of a plot armor. Yes, that's correct, Pumpkin. People do confuse fiction first for narrativist mechanics. In fact, I actually think people confuse fiction first, and narrativist, and what I'll just call good story. I think all these things are actually quite different. And that's exactly right, Testy Trekkie. Different mechanics will influence how the game feels to be played. Indiana Jones feels much better in Savage Worlds than Call of Cthulhu. And a very smart and wise man named Ben from our Discord, he always quotes this idea that, system is setting. That the kind of system that you have and the kind of mechanics that are present in the game dictate, how that game it feels and how it plays out, and there is a big difference. And and Luke Crane, who I love, had an interview recently, I think, with Elder Goblin Games, who is has a YouTube channel. You should check him out. He stops in here sometimes, and Luke Crane was saying something along the lines of, to all these people who say, system doesn't matter. A lot of people say that system doesn't matter. It's the GM. It's the story. And he laughs and he says, okay, next time, your group is sitting down, ask them, say, okay, then we'll play Burning Wheel, and then see what they say. And, everyone laughed because the joke was that, everyone's going to be like, whoa, well, wait, hold on a second. We're not playing Burning Wheel. And it's like, wait, I thought you said system doesn't matter. I thought you said system doesn't matter. And if system doesn't matter, then it shouldn't matter what system we're playing, right? So let's just play Burning Wheel. And then people will suddenly get really opinionated about what system they want to play, which is really funny. But anyways, so there's a great example. Champions is a very simulationist heavy. These are all superhero games, but Champions is very simulationist heavy. Mutants and Masterminds is very gamist, and Masks is very narrative. And I completely agree with all of those elements for sure. Champions is a lot. That's for 100% sure. And I think Heliospace makes a great point. I'm not saying you can't play Indiana Jones in Call of Cthulhu, but you're going to be ice skating uphill. And, maybe it's a hot take, but I think the biggest when people say that, 5e sucks, I think the problem is that you're just not using 5e for what it's good for, right? And you want something else. And you're just, and there's this mistaken, Andy, I mean, that Blade is one of my favorite movements of all, is one of my favorite movies of all time. And that is a great line. But, when a lot of people say 5e sucks, they say things like, whatever, it doesn't do this, doesn't do this, and doesn't do this. And I say, I think you're just looking to get a different experience. And there you have this mistaken concept that either system doesn't matter or that 5e is some sort of universal system. And it is, and neither of those things is true. I agree with Pumpkin. I think 5e is a pretty decent, what I will call modern dungeon crawler. I think it actually works pretty good at that. And I don't mean dungeon crawler in the way that most people, nowadays when they think of a dungeon map, they're thinking of some newfangled 5e module that's like, it's like, oh, here's the dungeon. That's the whole dungeon. Oh, wait. We forgot the obvious boss fight. There we go. There's the dungeon. I maybe there's too many choices in this for this to be a real dungeon, right? Some 7-room dungeon, whatever that you could walk across in 5 minutes. Now, granted, 5e is not the best dungeon crawler for sure. I mean, that is 100% the case. I think there are better dungeon crawlers for sure, but D&D by and large is the child of somebody said that's too complicated for WotC. Okay. All right. Joe, I will take your word for it. I was giving them too much credit perhaps. But 5e, we've talked about this before, but I'm a firm believer that 5e was a mea culpa to the RPG community, and especially to the oldies. So I think there was a lot of people who were playing D&D. They loved 3rd edition, and they came out with 4th edition, and which I love, of course. But a lot of people felt like, this was not the D&D that they loved. In fact, to a certain extent, ironically, D&D 4th edition is what a lot of people love and want out of a game now. It kind of gets out of your way, with the exception of combat, which has very detailed and strict rules and gives you all sorts of cool things so that your fighter and your wizard are roughly equivalent in power. The spellcasters aren't OP. It's a great game for people who want to do high-powered superhero kind of shenanigans. And I think is an excellent system because of the level progression math. It's really, CR systems existed in 3rd edition, but 4th edition was the game that really kind of created what I will call robust, balanced mechanics. I'll even say that 4th edition is really designed around the idea of, having this, kind of railroady plot, which is what a lot of people want out of a game anyways. And so by and large, people, quote unquote, hated 4th edition. And so when WotC created 5th edition, they said, fine. We'll go back to giving you a old school vibes, mediocre dungeon crawler, and we'll include some of the cool tech that we developed out of 4th edition, and we'll call it a day. And, we'll make all those people who, want to go just play dungeons and whatever. And if you even look, at the original adventures that came out for 5th edition, things like Horde of the Dragon Queen and, even Flandelver, Princess of the Apocalypse. A lot of these dungeons, which people hate, by the way, these adventures, which people hate, I actually think I kind of like them. And I'll tell you why. Because they read a lot like old school dungeon modules. There's not really a whole lot of story, and a lot of the rooms are just keyed encounter areas with monsters sticking around in them. And it's not really clear what the story is. And I know a lot of people complain about that, but that's exactly what, B2 Keep on the Borderlands, B4 Lost City, T1 Village of Hamlet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you know, I remember when these came out, I remember Smith and I were like, oh man, these are kind of old school, and people hated them. So, and Flandelver, I think, is really old school. You know, not like super old school. It's not like literally like B2 Keep on the Borderlands, but for 2014 or whatever, it was pretty old school. Now, is 4th edition a good dungeon crawler? I'm going to say yes and no. The reason why I say yes is because, as Dan O'Bra points out, it has a great resource management system in healing surges. It is absolutely a fantastic element for that. So, by far, it is very good. What I will say, and this isn't 4th edition's fault, but 4th edition, because it gives you all these cool, the downside of 4th edition is the balanced math, and dungeons, by and large, I think work better in a sort of more sandboxy way. And I don't know that 4th edition works as well in a sandbox kind of element. So, I mean, again, Smith ran a whole dungeon campaign in 4th edition. I ran dungeon campaigns in 4th edition. I ran plenty of dungeons in 4th edition. And again, I do think it is Dungeons and Dragons. You can play dungeons in it, absolutely. And I'm not even trying to say that you can't. What I am saying is that the modern day, belief structure of what an adventure should be, of, I don't know, some railroaded, some railroaded encounter train that looks like this, right? This is like the modern aesthetic of an adventure, right? Where it's like cool set piece encounter, cool set piece encounter, cool set piece encounter, and then the boss, right? That is custom. That is fantastic for 4th edition. Because the other thing that I was going to say, this is more of a logistics thing, Dan O'Bra, is, in my opinion, what makes a 4th edition encounter. And I'm talking about not just a combat encounter, but I'm talking about a non-combat encounter, which, yes, means, skill challenge, is having it well designed. And I've said this before, you guys have seen me talk about this before, but like, if I was sitting down and I'm going to create a 4th edition style encounter. So I'm like, okay, so usually I think, generally speaking, I mean, there's other options, but I usually start with, is this a wide room? And this is very generic. Is this a long room, or is this a square room? And, one of my favorites to go to, of course, is I love a wide room, which just means it's wider. It doesn't have to necessarily, these are all abstract distances. And let's assume that the party is entering here. And so I start building up the combat in a series of, let me turn my dots on. I start building up the combat in a series of ways of how do I challenge, how do I challenge the PCs? And so, one of the first things I do, and again, I'm going to assume here is that the PCs are here, is let's start with some damage. So I'm going to put, an artillery in the 2 corners. And so now that they're going to be firing down, and they've got this great distance between them and the PCs. Okay, so the PCs are going to want to naturally break off and kill my weak artillery. So I'm going to put a soldier here and a soldier here to sort of, gum up the works, if you will. And so now the idea is that, well, maybe the PCs will go straight through here and kind of cut to the side and cut to the side. Okay, so let me put some sort of hazardous terrain or some sort of trap area in the center. Maybe it's a bubbling pool of acid, or maybe it's literally like spikes that shoot up out of the ground. It's kind of like a tough zone. And maybe I'll make sure that the soldiers have some push mechanics built into them, so that positioning around this trap area, they can push PCs into the trap area, hit them, and maybe as like an additional dagger, to the heart, I'll make the trap deal damage plus slow, which in D&D 4th edition made it so that your movement speed was only 2 squares per turn, right? So now you're slow. Now you can't get to the artilleries, which is going to give the soldiers more time to reposition and knock you back into the trap. And of course, this might be a level 5 artillery, and this might be a level 5 artillery, and this is a level 5 soldier, and this is a level 5 soldier, and I make the trap level, I'll make it level 5. And now I have 5 level 5s, so this is a standard level 5 encounter. And, and then maybe I add some additional terrain, like, okay, well, maybe I want to give some covering terrain in the form of a pillar here and a pillar here and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, point is, I put a lot of work into doing this, because then after I build this template, right, I need to go and find the monster. I need to pick 2 artillery monsters, pick 2 soldier monsters, maybe create this trap. And then when it's all done, I'm going to put it in my dungeon. Great. Well, okay, I'm not going to lie to you. If I spend all this time making this really cool encounter, fuck, I want to use it. And unfortunately, when I designed a dungeon, I designed a dungeon in such a way that, there is so many different looping paths that could potentially link you to, all these different potential areas, that there's no way that I can, ever guarantee that your character will have gone, to this room where I have this really cool fight. And, when I'm playing like BXD&D, okay, the designing the fight for BXD&D might look like this: 2d6 orcs. That's it. Like that's the combat build for this room in old school D&D, in BXD&D or OSE D&D or whatever it is. 2d6 orcs. Now, now a lot. Dan Oprah says boring. Okay, I'm going to counter though. Okay, Dan Oprah, I'm going to counter that it is boring from a tactical combative positioning. Okay, like if you're looking at it strictly as a combative math, but when you add in the fact that you have random number of orcs, plus if you use reaction rolls, okay, plus you use morale checks. Now, while this doesn't make this combat as, of a cool, I don't know what to call it, like it doesn't make it as cool of a cool tactical miniature action RPG, cool using our powers in a very tactical, team-oriented, like an Avengers combat move. It's like, oh, I'm going to wombo combo off a Cap's shield, and Iron Man's going to blast him, and he's going to turn it into an AoE or something like that. Like you might get in Draw Steel or something like that. This encounter, with its variability in the number of orcs, and its variability in the reaction rolls, and its variability in their morale, makes it that, yes, while the combat in this room might not be the most exciting thing, what is cool about old school D&D is you have no idea, right, how this encounter is going to go. Even as the game master, the party might come in here and there are 3 orcs, and they are, they're wary, but maybe they're and their morale is low or something like that. Maybe they were part of a raiding party that got defeated, and now they're holed up and they're looking for help. And there's just you can generate so many more types of encounters in old school games. If you are literally running this as 2d6 orcs and they fight every time, I agree. That is boring, and I think that is that's unfortunate. And again, it's one of those instances where when D&D editions changed, they kept so much of what originally was cool about the game, and then they got rid of some of the really key and critical and essential parts. And for me, one of those key, critical, essential parts was reaction rolls. Now, again, in 4th edition, we didn't have reaction rolls. And you know what? I was okay with it. Because again, I didn't design this fight so that they, that the artillery monsters in these awesome kill box positions could sit there and have talking, could sit there and hang out and, shoot the shit with the party. I designed this to be a gamist, tactical challenge, right? So, and to a certain extent, I don't even really care what the monsters are. They're kind of just there to be cool and use their powers and have the party use their powers and have us, fight and who's going to come out the winner. So, going back to old school D&D, you didn't have the cool powers. The orcs didn't. The orcs certainly didn't have the cool powers. You didn't have the cool powers. If you did get into a fight, it was honestly more of like, I don't know how many of you gamble, but it's like, you put your hit points. It's like playing craps. You put your hit points, most of them, on the pass line, and then you're rolling the dice to see who wins. Because there's not really, tactics per se in the game. Because there's combat as war and all that other jazz. But if you're just relying strictly on the math, it's kind of just like hey, you got into combat. It's kind of a dice off. So in old school D&D, ironically, this becomes a much more nuanced and a much more potentially in-depth encounter. In fact, I think one of the few, or there's plenty of them now, but one of the coolest, one of the best things that you can add to an old school game, I'm sure I have something up here. Where's my toolbox? I'm always taking it down because it's one of my useful things. By the way, shout out, I've covered it before on this channel, but if you haven't bought it, now is the time. It is on BackerKit right now. Tell them I sent you. It won't make actually any difference, but this is currently funding, or currently this is on BackerKit. This is Ultimate Toolbox. We did cover this before a long time ago. It was like Derek's favorite prep tools, and they are reprinting it. And I don't know if they're adding more stuff to it, but it is an opportunity to get the book. Retooling a classic. Let's see what it says here. No, just it was released in 2009. So they colorized some of the artwork. Very system neutral. You know, obviously it was designed technically for 3rd edition back in the day, but anyways, I was gonna say with the toolbox, or with something like oh, here it is. Here's my this is not the ultimate toolbox. This is the original toolbox. But what I was gonna say is one of the best types of tables that you can have is a motivation table, because if you roll a motivation and combine that with a reaction roll, you have almost infinite possibilities, right? Because if you roll on the reaction roll and the way that they react to the party is, hostile, and their motivation might be, to earn money, well then maybe they've just discovered a treasure, and they have it, and they're hostile because they were trying to earn money and they're worried that the players are going to take it. Okay. On the other hand, if their motivation is to earn money or to earn wealth, and they are, friendly, or they are whatever, maybe they know where treasure is, but it's too strong for them. The party needs to team up. You want to team up together? We can split the money, and we'll worry about betraying them later or something. And you get this feralness that emerges from the gameplay. So while I think that this encounter as a combat encounter from 4th edition is better as a 4th edition encounter, it 99% of the time, this is going to play out as a combat encounter. What this encounter could play out with, especially like I said, if you add in a motivation roll, okay, from there's a lot of different sources online, just have random motivation tables. This motivation, reaction roll, morale, plus random number of orcs, I think gives you infinite possibilities of different types of encounters. And again, this gets to the idea too that in old school games, combat could be pretty deadly. You died at 0 hit points. In BX D&D, anyways. I know ADnD had various death's door optional rules, but yeah. What model is our whiteboard? Well, the whiteboard that you're looking at is just Microsoft Whiteboard. I also sometimes use Excalidraw. In terms of what I am writing on, it is a Wacom Intuos Pro. A Wacom Intuos Pro. Anyways, I think both of these, can be really cool. Anyways, all of this was to say, going back to whatever the fuck we started with, going back to GNS, I was talking about combat as war. So, we talk about the idea of gamist, and we talk about the idea of simulationist, and we've talked about those a lot. And I think that this naturally leads to combat as sport. And I think this leads to combat as war. And I don't know why we never thought of, okay, well, what's the narrative? What's the narrativist equivalent of combat as sport or combat as war? And I think it's what we're calling, combat as cinema, So, so we have CAC, CAS, and CAW. And so it kind of is, what is it that you're trying to do? And what's more important to you, and what does the system, have to say about it? Anyways, so that was actually where all that conversation started with. Yes, Jess, also, this is going back when we were talking about 5th edition. You also have to remember, the RPG division, as I understand it, and I was part of, I did a lot of the playtesting back when D&D Next was a thing. The RPG division had been slashed. I think the 4th edition, at one point during the 4th edition, the D&D team was like 20 plus people. And those aren't like freelancers. I think it was like full-time staff members. You have to remember, they were coming out with sometimes 2 hardback books a month. There. I'm not even kidding. I mean, if you include like some of the softcover releases, I think for the first couple of years of its edition, 4th edition was releasing like 30 products a year. It was insane. I mean, it was just absolutely insanity. And so by the time when 5th edition came out, they had cut their RPG. It was down to like life support. I mean, I'm talking about life support. It was a couple of people. And, I think they were really trying to do sort of a final send off for D&D. I kind of viewed it as like a legacy Easter egg division, edition in that way. But I think a lot of the things that they saw in 5th edition, okay, I know this because, I hesitate to call myself petty. And I'm not petty. I hesitate to call Smith petty. But, we call ourselves serious trolls. Like, I remember, I've talked about this before, but, after our first actual play, Rise of the Rune Lords, ended, and people tipped us a ton of money, and we had these random wheels and random effects, and it caused all these problems, and the party TPK'd. And everyone was like, boo, hiss, that was terrible. And they were like, Derek, you don't need all these gimmicks, to have a successful game. You can just play it straight up Pathfinder 2 raw, and people would love that because we love Pathfinder 2 raw. We love you guys. And Smith and I knew that was completely bullshit. But in order to sort of be like, to really prove a point, we were willing to fall on our own sword. And so Smith and I were like, okay, we'll create a game that is completely by the book. And you will see. And they're like, yeah, the market will reward you. We'll be like, and it did terrible. Of course it did terrible. And so part of me thinks that the people at Wizards of the Coast were like, fine, you don't like well-ordered, clearly visible, laid out powers and structures with clearly delineated flavor text, useful iconography. Everything is color-coded and laid out in a very easy to follow and easy to understand manner. There's no rules ambiguity. Every power or spell is located in a small, tiny little block of text. Wizards and fighters are on the same power scaling. Okay, fine. You don't want all that? You were complaining about 4th edition? Fine. Here's endless natural language and spell effects are paragraphs and paragraphs long with mechanics interwoven with real language. We're not going to use game terms. We're going to make it so that, what is it? Like attack is not the same thing as making an attack, which is not the same thing as a basic attack, which is different from making a close combat attack or something. I don't even know all this 5th edition bullshit. And we're like, fine, wizards, turn it up to 1 million. Fighters, suck, and just, they were like, okay, fine. If that's what you guys want, if that's what the market is telling us, oh, hey, we had 4th edition, which most people consider to be. Now, granted, I will admit the Monster Manual 1 math was a little rough, especially at higher levels. And again, I stress, I think that when, if you're Wizards of the Coast, and you have 3 tiers of play, as you did in 4th edition, right? 1 to 10 is called Heroic, 11 to 20 is called Paragon, and 21 to 30 is called Epic. I think your first Monster Manual 1, should be like 80% monsters from here, 15% monsters from here, and maybe just like a couple of monsters from Epic level, because that way, people can see, oh, look at these cool monsters. And the fact of the matter is low-level monsters are easier to get right, and you're not going to fuck them up as much. And then later on, the next year or whatever, you release Monster Manual 2, which has more monsters from your second tier, and like a lot more monsters, and less monsters of lower level. Because you've learned more about how the game works, and you're more prepared as designers and writers to actually create these more complicated monsters. And then finally, Monster Manual 3, because realistically, so few people play at this level of the game anyways. That's still true today in 5th edition. So, anyways, but the point is that, you know, that they made terrible, you know, horrible game mechanics, and people were like, there you go, you got it, everything you want. You know, before 4th edition, the combat math worked great. The encounter balancing system was amazing. So they're like, okay, you know what, you guys didn't like that? Okay, fine. Here's 5th edition. Here's your CR system back. I don't know if that'll work, but it'll work for you, you know. So anyways, I don't know where I missed. I'm so behind on chat, but Jess says, also, Steven likes to create maximalist products like adventures that go into detail about every possible little thing, but an encounter of 2d6 orcs is saving a huge amount of word count that you can now invest elsewhere in your book. Or, God forbid, create a small product. You know, there's a reason why some of these old, you know, ancient modules, and people are like, oh man, it was so great. We played in it. It took us 5 months to go through the Caves of Chaos. And you're like, isn't that like a 28-page adventure? And you're like, yeah. It's crazy. 28-page adventure. I think there's 60 rooms in Caves of Chaos. Anyways, sorry, Kidrissa. I myself have kind of been out of chat as well. Yeah, and that's not even with getting into what I will call more modern tech, Pumpkin, because I'm strictly speaking about, you know, true old school games here. But when you start introducing concepts like fronts and ideas like factions, dungeon factions, you know, which I've talked about on this channel before, then you get some real, you know, evolution of play as well. No, combat as war is just the idea of like, you know, hey, we can't fight those. Okay, we ran T1, which is the village of Hamlet, the moat house. We ran that at Origins 2 years ago, and we ran Shadow Dark, which I ran having never read the book. This is what led Kelsey Dion to sign Smith's books. You're doing it wrong, because after the game, Kelsey came by and Stephen Glicker was like, oh, hey, Kelsey, or the next day he was like, oh, Kelsey, Derek ran Shadow Dark and he was running it completely wrong. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't really read the rules. And she was like, that's awesome. And like, I think Stephen was hoping, you know, that she would be upset or give me shit. And she was just like, nah, that was awesome. But anyways, we ran Shadow Dark and we ran T1, Village of Hamlet. I ran it as Village One House. And there's a room. I don't exactly remember the room, but there's a room with like no entrances or something like that. And there's a bunch of bandits. And I don't exactly remember what happened, but the group looked in there and they realized that this room had no exits. And so they did something like, they somehow like threw a bunch of like oil or like something on, they threw a bunch of stuff in here on fire, and then they closed the door and locked it. And, you know, they just let the bandits kind of, I mean, to be fair, the bandits probably didn't burn to death. You know, they probably just, you know, got smoked out, choked out, passed out, carbon monoxide. I mean, they were dead. But point is, they didn't fight the bandits. They just did some bullshit that, like, you know, some people might call it combat as war. Other people might call it war crimes, combat as war crimes. But regardless, they just, you know, did that instead of fighting them. And that's what combat as war is. Now, doing something like that, which I just described, in 4th edition D&D would be not only probably quote-unquote not possible, but I do feel like it would be against the spirit of the game. And I think that's where a lot of people ran into problems with 4th edition, for sure. Anyways, so late we're in submarine lighting. Yeah, we are. Well, I was. Hold on a second, let me go over here. I don't even know if I might not have my headphones. Let me see. I was messing around with. I've been setting up. There we go. So I've been setting up new lighting for the studio sets. So this is, you know, when we did our if you're a patron, you got a chance to watch us do. We played the One Ring, and we were doing like a tech demo. And we had the main lighting, the key lighting, the white lighting up on our players. And so now I'm messing around with the background lighting. And I was getting some of that stuff ready. So that's why there's some weird lighting stuff going on here. But okay, so the whole reason this thing started was because, oh, there we go, sorry, is because we were talking about combat as sport. And what I was going to say is, the problem is that as your game becomes more and more and more truly combat as sport, it really does truthfully become more like a board game. And by that, I mean a game like Descent. Or, because not even Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven doesn't have a game master. But Descent, which is a board game from Fantasy Flight Games, you have what's called an overlord. And, they are trying to win. And the game is set up in such a way that they can. It's not like, oh, you get to play the overlord and get to watch your friends win. No, like the overlord is trying to win. And the players are trying to win. And the overlord is very much limited by the game's rules such that they can't just say, oh, more monsters arrive, because that wouldn't be fair or remotely close to fair. So as you kind of move away from combat as you move deeper and deeper into combat as sport, you do eventually get into this element of a board game, because you and I are playing on the same. We're playing on the same space. We're playing on the same rules. So. Well, Dan Obra, that's also a great point. This is also assuming that you have to fight. One of the problems that emerges from the modern day gaming structure is, let's just take a classic example of a dungeon. Okay, so we've got we've got our entrance here, we got a room 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 here. Okay, and we will, we'll link some of these up here. And okay. Now, part of the issue with this dungeon, in modern day sensibilities, is show me where the boss is. And you probably will have a hard time, because there is no room, aside from this first one, there is no room that you have to go through. But what this means is, let's say you're a level 1 party. Okay. I can randomly or deliberately, I can put a level 8 monster in this room. And that's okay, because the group doesn't have to fight it. Hell, the group may never even encounter it. The group may be, they're totally fine to go away. They're totally fine to go around it. They're totally fine to sneak past it. They're totally fine to do a million different things to this monster. The problem is that if my dungeon instead looks like this, entrance, now, if I put, again, this is our entrance. If I put a level 8 monster in this room, now I'm kind of being a dick. Because now I'm telling the players, you have to go through this monster. And not only that, they know, oh, they don't have to, Derek. They could turn around. They could go back to town. Yeah, but number one, they're PCs. You might be like, you have to get to the boss and save the village or save the prince before he gets executed or before he gets sacrificed. And as players, you go, look, the DM bought this adventure. If we just leave the dungeon, we're kind of being dicks as players, because this is what he prepped. This is what he bought. This is what she spent all of her time getting ready for. And so you feel an obligation, both as PCs, because you're the heroes, and as players, because this is what our GM bought or this is what our GM prepped, that you have to go through the encounters. And then, you got 2 optional encounters. But if you put this level 8 encounter here, the players go, we have to go through it. But it's not fair because they have to fight it. So the only reason encounter balance became a thing is because suddenly you have this idea or this notion of encounters that you have to beat. If you are forcing the players to have to go through your encounter, then it is unfair for you to make it very high level or unfair in some way, because now you've basically set them up to lose. And that, I think, is unfair. So I'm just catching up here. Level 2 janitor knew exactly what was going to happen when you said the room had no exit. See, they were coded in on the bandits. There we go. The Geneva Canadian District. Well, technically this was at T1, Village of Hamlet, so technically this was in O-Earth. This was in Greyhawk, but yeah. Correct, Heliospace. It would be very weird for the Avengers to win a fight like that, where you just, threw people into a room and closed the barriers and, kill them. That would be really weird. I actually reminded of that scene. Do you remember that scene from Braveheart, where William Wallace, Mel Gibson's character, goes to meet with the English to discuss peace, but he knows, or, and to be fair, it's not like he has actually any evidence. He just feels like he knows it's a trap, and so like the English are up there, and then he like rushes in and pushes them back into the thing, and then closes it and slams they slam it shut and set it on fire, and then they burn them all to death. Remember that scene? Like, that's a combat as war. Remember when Daenerys Targaryen killed all of the Khals at Vaes Dothrak by taking advantage of the fact that she was immune to fire? So her two bodyguards killed the handful of guards, locked the door, and then she was like, well, I'm immune to fire, so I'm just going to burn this entire building down from the inside, and you're never going to see it coming. And there we go. I killed all of you, and now I am the high call of all of the Dothraki. Sorry, I'm just reading everything here. Yes, War Mech is definitely one of these side rooms, correct. In fact, hold on a sec. Let me bring this up. Let me see if I have it. I should have it. This is a great example. Let me see. I'm almost positive I have this. I do. Okay, great. Okay. Let me turn off my whiteboard and turn on my PDF. So this is a 3rd edition adventure, Forge of Fury. It was reprinted in one of those 5th edition reprint adventures, so classic. This adventure is, do they tell us what this adventure is for? Here we go. I mean, it's on the cover, but I can tell you it's for level 3 characters. Maybe it's on the back. Let me see if it's on the back. There you go. For 3rd level characters. There it goes, right there. For 3rd level characters. So this is designed for level 3 characters. And this is 3rd edition, which had the CR system. Okay. And for those of you who don't remember how the CR system worked in 3rd edition, I don't remember how it works in 5th edition, but a CR1 adventure or CR1 monster was supposed to be a reasonable fight for a party of 4 level 1 characters. Okay. And then the math was kind of wonky because a CR1, challenge rating 1 monster, was also technically an encounter level 1 monster. It meant the same thing. But like 2 CR1 monsters actually made an encounter level 3 fight, which meant that 2 level 1 monsters would make a good fight and for a level 3 party. So if we look at the beginning of this adventure, and by the way, it's an ancient dwarven stronghold that was ruined long ago. There is no plot reason to go here. It's just to go there to get treasure. In fact, if you look at the hooks for the adventure, it might be that the party has acquired a map showing the location of a secret dwarven stronghold. Perhaps they discovered the map in a previous adventure. It doesn't really matter, but they can use this to begin their explorations. Or there is a local nobleman who wants to find the legendary cache of the smiths of the dwarves and will offer them a reward of 500 gold pieces above market value for any blade recovered with Durgadin, the legendary dwarven smith's mark. So treasure and wealth, and then if you want something a little bit more, it's like, oh, there's orcs that are based out of there, and the local village is offering a bounty of 25 gold pieces per orc slain or captured. So it's money, money, and money. Those are the motivations. Anyways, so if you look at this dungeon adventure, you will see that you have things like, there's an EL1 encounter. Here is an EL2 encounter. And again, this is for level 3 party members. Here's the orc shaman. It's an EL4, so tougher fight, but pretty reasonable for EL4. Okay, so what about if we go? There is a part, one of the levels of the dungeon. I'm going to the bottom so you can see the map. One of the levels of the dungeon is called the sinkhole. There's 5. They're not levels really to this dungeon. It's kind of laid out in a kind of funky manner. Is there a message? Is there a thing that shows how it's laid out? Yeah, there you go. So you can see that the mountain door is the first level, and then you go down to the glitter hame, and then you can go down to the sinkhole, or you can go up to the foundry, and the sinkhole and the foundry both lead to the Black Lake. Spoiler alert, the Black Dragon is in the Black Lake. Anyways, you can go down to this sinkhole. And one of the things that they have here in the sinkhole, in the encounter level, is a roper. I'm trying to find it. Oh. And there's a cool sidebar in this dungeon. Oh, I'm in the foundry. That's why. Okay, here we go. So there's room 33 is the Roper's Cavern. And look at the EL. It is EL10. Okay? They're level 3 party members. Okay? A Roper is a CR10. And it basically says a Roper is far more than a party of 3rd or 4th level characters can handle without hard losses. This encounter is placed here so that you give the players an important lessons. Sometimes you need to avoid encounters that you can't talk your way through. If despite the warning sign, the characters try to attack this creature, they should be prepared to lose a party member to that monster. If you know your group might assault this monster for sure, it might be best to omit this encounter altogether. At least they were trying to be somewhat nice. But my point is that they were trying to put this in here because they were trying to say, like, hey, look, sometimes there's a monster in here that is not to be fought. And you might, it's not about overcoming the challenge, and it's not about whatever. It's just about avoiding that challenge. Now, here's the problem. See, people get into this mindset of, oh, yeah, but that'll break the game, because if my players sneak past the roper, aren't I supposed to award them with the EL10 experience, the CR10 experience? Aren't they going to be a millionth level? And to a certain extent, maybe if you believe in that, that's right. But see, that's a problem that emerged in 3rd edition, because we started giving experience only for monsters, and we didn't give experience for treasure. And so that created this problem of now players were incentivized to encounter monsters, because that's where the experience points were. Even if encountering the monster meant, maybe your GM was nice and didn't, would award you experience points if you snuck past a monster, or if you did something like that, not necessarily just kill it. But even still, it was encouraging you as a player, right? What gets managed gets, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. Well, what got rewarded starting in 3rd edition D&D was encountering creatures. And for most people, that meant killing them. And so this created this massive shift in the game, and how the game was played and how the game was rewarded. And it really created a problem. It's late night, Papa Pyrite. It's 2 a.m. Ever the dick, George. Always a dick. So exactly, and that's one of the reasons why we look at what a game rewards when we look at the 3 big questions of Jared Sorensen's questions, which is, what does a game reward? If you get levels for if you get levels for treasure, your game's about treasure. If you get levels for killing monster, then that's when your game about. Didn't second edition use XP? I know monsters had XP. They did, but it was very little, Gangrel. It wasn't unusual for as much as 90% of your experience. Actually, second edition actually was the worst of both worlds, and actually why. Here's why. Let me explain why. Oops, I forgot we have our sound turned off and everything. We're amateur hour over here. I don't even have my tip goals up because I just didn't even think about it. Here we go. Sorry. Does this work? Yeah, it does. Okay. So we had a super chat from Tasty Trekkie. I support a corporate sales team, and what is measured and rewarded is what drives our sales team, sometimes to the detriment of the overall company. Tasty Trekkie, absolutely. In fact, I developed that mantra because I used to be an analyst for a corporate claims department, and a lot of times what people were rewarding is got what repeated, and it wasn't always for the best thing of the company, for sure. So here's why second edition was in some ways the worst edition, and why I think a lot of people had a problem. Okay, in first edition AD&D, and we could trust me on this. We could look these up, but just trust me on this. Let's say a fighter needed 2,000 XP to go from level 1 to level 2. Okay, an orc, and this is kind of from memory, but an orc, which could totally kill a first level fighter, mind you, I think was worth 15 XP. Now, keep in mind that 15 XP was divided by 5 or 6 people because you had 5 or 6 people in your party. So that meant, let's just for convenience sake, let's just say you had a small party of 5 people. That meant an orc. By the way, as a fighter, you didn't get max hit points. You rolled a D10. Okay, and an orc might do D8 points of damage. So you can easily see where I'm going with this, right? That you could just die. Anyways, so let's say that an orc on average gave you 3 XP. And now remember, definitely 2 hits from an orc could kill you. You needed 2,000 XP to level. An orc gave 15. It generated 3 because there were 5 people in your party. That meant that in order for you to level up, you needed to kill 666 orcs. I think that's right. That's a lot of orcs. Okay? That's an infinite amount of orcs. But in first edition D&D, you also got 1 XP for each gold piece of treasure that you returned from the dungeon with. And you might roll randomly, and you might be like, hey, cool, you find a jade statue with emerald eyes, and it's worth 1,500 gold pieces. And you're like, cool, we sell it. Cool, everybody gets 300 XP. So you can see that just getting a jade statue with emerald eyes is way better and way quicker, and it will take you forever to kill these. And this is how first edition was set up. No optional rules. Okay, first edition AD&D. Enter second edition AD&D. Released in 1989. Here's the problem with second edition AD&D. It's the same game. Our fighter still needs 2,000 experience points to level. And the orc is still worth 15 XP. Here's the problem. Everything else that awarded XP in second edition AD&D was technically in a blue box in the DMG. And that meant it was an optional rule, which meant that one of the optional rules was 1 GP of treasure equals 1 XP. There was also an optional rule for things like, wizards got bonus experience points for casting cool spells and solving problems. Fighters got a little bit of bonus experience points for fighting tough monsters or whatever. But these were optional rules, including this treasure rule. But the orc is still worth 15 experience points, and the fighter still needs 2,000 experience points to level. Now, I've talked before about how one of the problems with D&D games is when they go from edition to edition and edition, they keep some of the rules, but they drop supporting elements that make those rules functional. I can't speak for all of you, but I can speak for me and my group, which is that when I was a teenager, I thought gold for experience was dumb. I grew up playing JRPGs. I grew up playing Final Fantasy. You only got experience points for killing monsters. And so I thought I thought this was dumb. I didn't even understand it. I certainly didn't appreciate the math. And I didn't really know first edition at the time. I only knew second edition AD&D. And so my group, and what I'm believing is a lot of groups, just made you fight hundreds of orcs to level. And so second edition was an absolutely horrendous, painful slog. Because they took, they took these core rules that made it possible for you to actually get 2,000 experience points, and then they made it GP. So then because that was an optional rule, they got rid of it. The only way you could get experience points in second edition was fighting monsters. So then everybody started fighting monsters. But then the problem was that second edition D&D, your characters were still fairly fragile. There was an optional rule for Death's Door where you died at negative 10 HP instead of 0. But that was an optional rule. Not everybody played with it. But people complained because the game changed, and then we got to third edition D&D, where negative 10 HP death was now the rule, not an optional rule. It was now the rule. And now an orc in third edition D&D was a CR 1/2. Which meant that an orc now gave 150 XP. And the fighter in first edition, now all the classes use the same XP chart. But guess what? Fighter, you still needed 2,000 experience points to level. So they literally times 10'd how much an orc was worth. So in second edition, an orc was worth, to go from level 1 to level 2 in second edition, a fighter needed 2,000 experience points. To go from level 1 to level 2 in third edition, a fighter needed 2,000 experience points. But in second edition, an orc was worth 15 experience points. And in third edition, an orc was worth 150 XP. So now the game becomes even more about fighting monsters because it's literally worth 10 times as much. And you definitely got 0 for getting any treasure. I have no idea where we're at. I've just been kind of going off on a whiteboard rant here. Anyways, so long story short, because people have a different messed up concept of what math and all this other stuff is. If we had a dungeon scenario, okay, a roper, and then behind the roper was another chamber with 10,000 gold pieces. And I'm totally spitballing here. I mean, I could try to look it up really quickly, but let's just say that the roper is worth, 500 XP and could definitely kill your character. The 10,000 gold, not going to kill your character, believe it or not, and it's worth 10,000 XP. And this means that as a party, you are very much incented. Like, if you fight the roper, and it's very dangerous, and it could definitely kill you, even if you're higher level, it could definitely kill you. If you fight the roper, which could definitely kill you, you are going to get 10,500 XP. And maybe die. If you find some way to go around the roper, sneak past the roper, dimension door past the roper, use a pass wall spell past the roper, travel through the shadow dimension, insert a million trillion billion bullshit things here. But if you just get the treasure, you get 10,000 XP and you don't have to fight the bullshit roper. So when you compare these two scenarios, I think it's pretty obvious that you would rather do this one. You get, you don't have to fight the roper. And so, in a way, first edition AD&D, original D&D, BX D&D actually disincentivized incentivized fighting monsters because it was a ton of squeezing for just a little bit more juice. Because fighting the monster awarded so little experience points and was so fucking deadly. Especially in a game where when you got to 0 HP, you were just dead. And there was no healing surges. There was no hit dice. There was no, I pull out another, 50 charge wand of Cure Light Wounds. Stuff like that. Yeah, it's a bullshit term that the OSR people like to use, and especially Questing Beast. I think it's kind of a stupid term, but yes, I'm aware of what it is. Unless you weren't talking to me, but but anyways, I think the fruitful void concept is dumb. I think the fruitful void concept, that's a whole separate issue. Yeah, we do eat ham at Christmas, actually. Okay. But I do not like that term, by the way. Sorry, everyone in chat is arguing with the one guy hung up on OSR games. Oh, okay. There's a lot of things in the OSR, because the problem that I have with the OSR is the OSR has committed the cardinal sin that PF2 did, right? PF2 became their worst enemy by being like, we are superior gameplay to 5th edition. And then they started pissing all the 5th edition people off because, they were being like zealots and crusaders. And now OSR people, I think, by and large, kind of do the same thing, which is unfortunate. And I also think a lot of OSR people, in my personal opinion, miss some of the intent. But again, now LaFlamel, I actually completely agree with you. But yes, I actually completely agree with you, LaFlamel. I do think it's possible to over-design a game. But I also think it's possible to under-design a game and then sell it as an upgrade by being like, it's the fruitful void. Aren't you? What am I buying? What you're paying for is the lack of rules and mechanics in this game. You should thank me for how little I put into this game. So like that's where I think the fruitful void gets problematic. So yes, I don't think I definitely think, when we were talking about earlier, when we were talking about the 2d6 orcs, and you don't have to have a fully mapped out combat structure. You can have a motivation table and a reaction roll table and a morale table, and you can generate really cool encounters from that. Like, yeah, I think that is leaning towards fruitful void done well. But I do think that there's instances in many places where people use fruitful void as like a selling point for their game. It's like a mechanic, like as if like me selling you nothing is an advantage. But yes, exactly. When designers make a conscious choice not to include rules because they feel like it improves the play experience. It's so late that Derek is starting to make sense. Now, again, I mean, look, if their customers buy it and they're happy, then no harm was done. The mothership lack of stealth situation is the exact situation that I would be talking about. Like, I know a lot of people think that's really cool. I am not one of them. I think system matters. I think system is setting, and the like, we could do Dolmenwood tomorrow. So I sent you a message, Vin. I didn't even know if you were available. But Bob is not available, so we cannot do Land of Eam. So we could do Dolmenwood. We could totally do Dolmenwood. Is either Dolmenwood or Bonds and Persona mechanics. Right. Now again, right. Or we could do that or friendship. So we can ask people what they want to do. Well, we've been doing a lot of first looks lately, so I don't know, but maybe I don't know. We'll see. Absolutely, right. I kind of agree with that. But I also think that, like, well, again, I'm like Pumpkin, where I am a more gamer. I'm a more gamist gamer, for sure. Danobra, it's so from my readings, both of Gary Gygax, because Gary Gygax used to write on EN World. I have a great book that his widow put out, where she, oh, here it is. Cheers, Gary. It's a compilation of all he used to answer. He used to go on to EN World forums all the time, EN World, and he would answer questions all the time. And so this is a compilation of like every single post that he made on EN World, and accumulated, and so I have a somewhat of an insight into his thinking process, and obviously two books have been written about him and the like. And what I will say is this: I think Gary Gygax was highly influenced by the Free Kriegspiels and the Braunstein style of gaming, where it was very much the players didn't even know the rules. They just came up with stuff, and the GM made a ruling. So all of that, I think, was very much, and from my understanding, that is exactly how Gary Gygax played his game. But that is not what Gary Gygax was trying to do with advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There was monetary reasons for it. Gary wanted to create Advanced Dungeons and Dragons because it got Dave Arneson off of the books, and so he didn't have to share the profits. There's that. But the other element of it was, and I can respect this because now I run a mega game. Gary, the way that D&D the way that Gary envisioned D&D being played is that Derek Rawlings would have his campaign. And what Derek Rawlings' campaign meant was basically Derek Rawlings, it was his dungeon. Okay? And Jess would have her campaign. And that basically meant Jess's dungeon. In fact, the term campaign and dungeon were almost synonymous. And the way that Gary saw D&D being played was that, and then of course, I have my dungeon, aka my campaign. The way that Gary saw the future of D&D being played is that, Gridlock would have their PC. And that PC would play in all of these different campaigns. That player would take their sheet and go to another person's dungeon. Gary wrote either on EN World or in Dragon Magazine about how, he remembers like seeing a character that had like a Holy Avenger and had to call his DM up to make sure that it was official, like it wasn't like, it kind of reminds me of Ryutama. Remember how how the players have to sign the slip that confirms that the game master actually ran the session for real, and thus the game master gets to level up. I don't know if everybody remembers this. It was like right near the end when we were all, when I was losing my mind completely. And like we learned about how like Japanese gaming culture is completely different from our gaming culture, where the GM is basically just running games to level up himself as a dungeon master, but he's running it with different party members. And so he needs those party members to basically, sort of sign an affidavit saying, yes, I played in this GM session, and yes, he leveled up. Anyways, so when Gary saw that this is how D&D was being played, he saw that there was potentially a problem, which is, Well, if Derek is using his own set of rules, and Jess is using her own set of rules, and Derek is using his own set of rules, and we're all running it a little bit differently, then there's going to be madness, and there's going to be chaos. And how could you run tournament D&D? And how could you run, how could you run a PC through a multiple different dungeons if every DM is making all these rules up all the time? And so part of the reason he made ADnD, and he talks about this in the ADnD forward, is because he wanted to create sort of one core truth, a sort of universal rule set that all GMs must follow in order to promote this ability for your character to be able to go from campaign to campaign to campaign, aka from dungeon to dungeon to dungeon. And this is one of the challenges that we have with our mega games. Because when we run a mega game, we essentially have a bunch of different GMs who are all running their own games. And we are theoretically running a Pathfinder 2. But every DM runs their game a little different. And some DMs don't want to, some GMs don't want to allow certain things and certain bullshit things. And some GMs award something and then other GMs think that is bullshit. And so I could see what Gary was saying, which is you kind of need one universal rule set that kind of theoretically covers all of the situations, which would, in theory, make AD&D a very, and I don't even want to say combat, but I will say, campaign as sport, because that is definitely the way that I think Gary Gygax was sort of envisioning it. But from his writings, and from what other people have written about Gary Gygax, it's my understanding that he didn't really play that way. I think he said something like, his quote was like, I only roll the dice to hear the tinkle of the sounds that they make, or something like that. I don't remember. But my point is Gary Gygax was great, but I also necessarily know that we should idolize him and that we should necessarily view him as sort of he definitely created the hobby, but so did Dave Arneson. And people don't idolize Dave Arneson nearly as much. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that AD&D is sort of written as this is the one true God, and you will, and all men must worship him. And that is definitely the way that AD&D is written, because that was what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be this authoritative truth that would make it so that you would have one common standard across all of these different campaigns. That way, when Gridlock takes their PC from dungeon to dungeon to dungeon, from different GM to different GM to different GM, that character was, universal. And again, another way to think of it is Gary's vision for how D&D was going to be played is nowadays what we would call Pathfinder Society or D&D, right? Adventure League. And in Pathfinder Society or Adventure League, it's my understanding that they play that, they play that pretty tight. They play that pretty, by the book. So, in some ways that is still true. So now again, OD&D is different. Remember, you've got in 1974, you've got original Dungeons and Dragons, and the through line to that is to 1979's Blue Box Basic set, which then leads to 1981's Basic, which leads to 83's Basic, which leads to 91's Basic, which leads to 94's Basic. But at some point, there is the fork in 77 to AD&D, which then went to, in 89, to second edition. And then in theory, there was a merge in 2000 with third edition. So, that is the genealogy of D&D. So this is BX, this is Holmes, this is Beckme, this is Black, box. This is tan box. As far as I know. So yeah, so ADnD in second edition were on their kind of own fork line in a way, and more importantly, is my understanding, Dave Arneson got royalties for all of this. Dave Arneson did not get royalties for this, although he did sue, and then while he did not get royalties, they did settle the lawsuit. So good for Dave Arneson. But anyways, so I don't even know what we're talking about. But my point is, yeah, there's something to be said there. Derek randomly says, if we ever get dagger reaches, I will definitely have a dungeon for y'all. So this is actually a nice example of one of the challenges that we face with dagger reaches, which is, I think, a game like Daggerheart really empowers the different GMs to kind of go, a little wild, a little ham, because it's a very fiction first game. It's a very narrative game. And I think that don't get me wrong, there's variance. Okay. But if we talk about, if we talk about GM variance, and what we're measuring here is unknown, but it's just like the idea of like, how differently do GMs GM in a game like Pathfinder 2, you're going to have a definite dispersion of events. I think in a game like Daggerheart, you're going to have a much wider variance in the way that players play, or the way that game masters game master their games. And when we play a mega game, like the way that Gary Gygax was envisioning, we ask our GMs, right, to try to tighten up those ranges a little bit. We try to say, hey, listen, you don't have as much freedom as you would if you were running this game at home, okay? It's not quite Pathfinder Society, right? Pathfinder Society might look like this. If the red line is Pathfinder Society, the sparkly purple ones is Northern Reaches. The problem is that's not asking that much, because it's not that much of a shift. But with Daggerheart, it's a much, much bigger variance. And so if I ask GMs to sort of, be somewhere in the middle, now I'm potentially asking for a lot of adjustment, So, and then what you are describing is unfortunately what a lot of mega games do, which we, generally speaking, have tried to avoid. So, for example, my friend Ronald the Rules Lawyer, it's my understanding that Ronald the Rules Lawyer, I don't know if he still does, but Ronald the Rules Lawyer was running a, what some people mistakenly call a Western Marches style game. I don't think that's the right term to call it, but, we would call it a mega game, but set in Pathfinder 2, just like we were doing. But you know what Ronald was doing? Ronald was running this. Ronald was basically running where you had this sort of shared pool of PCs, and connecting to it was a bunch of GM's campaigns. And you could almost think of this as, this is Sigil, right? And you are going through a portal, and you are going to a new campaign, and a new campaign world to play in that GM's campaign. And each GM's campaign's world is its own, mutual thing. And it's the light rays inside of it are completely instant. Nothing gets outside of it, right? So the light rays stay inside of it. It bounces around inside of it, and nothing gets out of it, except for the player who goes in, gets some normalized treasure, normalized experience points, and then goes back to the shared pool PCs. And maybe they go back to that campaign again, or maybe they go to a different GM's campaign. But the key thing here is there was no overarching connection, right? This GM's campaign never impacted or penetrated into this person's campaign. It never changed what this PC could do, even though that PC never played in that GM's campaign. There were no lasting effects to your player character from going into that campaign. It was basically like playing, basically the way that Gary Gygax originally envisioned. So when we do a mega game, so what you're talking about, Derek, about having all this, each GM has their own frame, that's fine, but that isn't, and I think that would work, but that's not what I want out of a mega game, right? What I want out of a mega game is I want those shared connections. I want PCs to be impacted by other PCs' actions. I want other GMs' campaigns and ideas and adventures and dungeons and NPCs to be affected by one another. I want, when PCs A, B, and C go into this GM's adventure, it's going to affect PCs E, F, and G. And when PC D goes into this GM's campaign, it ends up affecting these two people's campaigns. And that interconnectivity is both what I think is the coolest thing about what we do, but it is also the hardest thing that we do, and it's the thing that we sometimes still struggle to get right and to make it work. Ronald the Rules Lawyer was running West Marches. Yeah, that's not that bad to say. A lot of GMs may not be happy when I give PCs that played in my game the Tarask Bone Gatling gun. Yeah, correct. For example, me. I don't even know if the Tarask Bone Flail was used on any actual GM monster other than mine. Yeah, Pepe Sylvia. I got boxes full of Pepe, okay? Correct. Exactly. We don't want the Shattered Realms. So Nutrimancer says that's similar to what we did. All PCs were mirror versions or something, but they kept all their advances. Yeah, that's fine. So, right, if you're writing the mega game, you write it so that the overall meta plot is about the connection between the frames. Well, Jess, this is where we try to have our cake and eat it too. We don't try to have a meta plot, right? We try to have it be completely emergent from play by relying on natural consequences that flow from the fiction, fronts, events, players-driven clocks. So the answer is we don't really have a meta plot per se. And that has had it has problems, which is what I've been actually, I spent most of today thinking about mega games, actually. Right, that is what I want, Nutrimancer. I want one shared sandbox. That's what I want. Correct. Right. And that, all I'm saying is at that point, we're not really doing our own frames, Yeah, but I think that, I think number one, I think that those emerged, through play. But I will also say, Jess, that in the first season, Mr. Smith, who I don't think you've ever met, he did realize that he was kind of more directive, and a lot of people really liked that. So he did sort of push a meta plot, or at least he pushed a front, if you want to call a front a meta plot, and it led to what some people think was one of the best campaigns that we did. But yeah, well, so the loggers, so this was the loggers, yeah. So to understand this meta plot, long story short, you had the city of Northport, and it had a level, and that level, I don't even know what the level was, like 5, okay, and that meant that you could buy items and goods of level 5 or lower, right? Totally fine, and we're playing PF2, mind you. So at a certain point, guess what? Some PCs started to get to level 6. and level 7 and level 8 and level 9. And the town was still level 5, right? So they can't buy level 6 items. They couldn't buy level 7 items. They couldn't buy level 8 items. They couldn't buy, and everyone who plays Pathfinder 2 knows you need those items in order to remain relevant, okay? Meanwhile, one of the adventure zones, okay, that you could go to was called the Jagged Pine Forest. And props to anybody who knows where that's from. Okay, and you could go adventure there. And as a result of this situation, there was basically a clock made. Okay? If the clock ever emptied, then basically it meant that the Jagged Pine Forest got industrialized and a good chunk of it got destroyed. And the resources were used by Northport to level up the town to like level 9. And there were a lot of people who really liked that. On the other hand, if the clock completed, then the Jagged Pine was, preserved. Okay? And the druids who oversaw Jagged Pine Forest would award all PCs in the game with free archetype druid. So mechanically, those were your choices. You could either do adventures that would fill up the clock, and if the clock filled up and all the way, then everyone in the party, everyone in the entire campaign got free archetype druid. By the way, nobody had free archetype at this point, except for people who sold their souls to the devils. But ignore that for a moment. But if you managed to get the clock completely removed, then when it gets to a last segment and it's dead, boom, the forest is basically, the lumberjacks come. Well, I should say, we didn't even have that, by the way. We didn't even have the lumberjacks, okay? That wasn't even a thing. It was just that the forest was, its resources were harvested and the town leveled up. Well, what ended up happening is some players, whether because of mechanics, mostly because of mechanics, some players really wanted this. And some players really wanted this. But also, there was also role playing involved. Some players didn't think, some players wanted to defend the forest, and other players were like, no, we must advance and the progress of civilization must matter. Long story short, you ended up having players who basically wanted one or the other, and that became known as the lumberjacks. Okay. The lumberjacks. Those are the people over here, also known as just the jacks. And then over here, you had what became known as the Jagged Pine Pact. So these factions of players emerged naturally simply because we put this clock, which we call a tug of war clock, into the game, and you ended up getting these distinct groups that emerged, and they hated each other, like a lot. This vitriol even carried over into season 2 a little bit. So yes, so Smith was willing to put, his finger on the scale by creating this clock. But to no one's surprise, some people loved it, and to no one's surprise, some people absolutely hated this. Hated this. So there were some players who were very annoyed and irritated by this. I mean, yes, this is the lumberjacks would frequently make fun of the Jagged Pine Pack by calling them hippies, and disparaging them as tree huggers and all this other stuff. Pumpkin says, Pumpkin was there, his character was there. He says I was on the progress side, and it was interesting. It was cool. It was feral. It was uncertain, but it led to bruised feelings and hurt egos, and some people took it way too seriously. But it did involve us putting our fingers on the scale. So I loved it so much. So, and a lot of people were basically like, "What the fuck does this have to do with Pathfinder 2? I just wanted to play Pathfinder 2." And so there was this idea that this game that emerged became so much more than just a game of Pathfinder 2, right? It became this kind of like, nature versus civilization, progress versus, conservation. And, the players were very engaged with this. But some people thought that was really cool. But like 4th edition D&D, okay, so many people also complained that when we did season 2, we really scaled back on that. We were like, okay, fine, we'll give you what you want. And a lot of people were like, yay. And then it was not as, maybe it wasn't as cool. Well, if people weren't mature enough to keep, if people weren't mature enough, there would be nobody left in the game. No, people were upset about the Cult of Asmodeus too, which led to the Cormus Bell being created. Correct, Zen Bullet. Correct. That's, but Beowulf is being a little bit naive here, because yes, people definitely got, hurt feelings even when they were being demeaned in character. Because, it's the classic thing where it's like, you go up to somebody and you're like, you're playing at the table and you're like, you're worthless, you're terrible, you're a terrible husband and a terrible father, and you are a worthless individual. And the person's like, damn, dude. You're like, dude, it's just what my character would say. I'm just method acting, bro. It's just what my character would say. You can't be insulted. You can't be upset. It's just what my character would say. And like, that defense has never worked, ever in a million years. And Derek, who has LARP experience, says, I've seen stuff like this get personal in LARPs before, so I get it, And Beowulf says, I love games with in-character conflict. They are the best games. And there is very little middle ground. We recently did a series of polls for both of our games, and it was like, from a 0 to a 5, or maybe, no, so 1 to 5, right? 1 being absolute hate, and 5 being love. And it was like, what are your feelings to this? What are your feelings to this statement? The next game is going to feature a lot of, character conflict. And it was like, it's like completely bimodal, like, it's just like, there is no in between. It's like, there's just, everyone's a 1 or a 5, and that has really strong. No, you'd think that the answer would be 2 games, Derek, but it's not. It's not. It's crazy. And here's the reason why. Okay. Here's the reason why. I've said this before. There's a problem. You know what the problem? Well, right. So Dan Obra is correct. And that has been our default. Okay. Because, and the reason why is because the 5s will play a conflictless game and not like make too big of a deal about it. Right. But the 1s will basically be miserable about playing a 5-person game. But now Jackal is saying something here, and I want this to be really important. The reason why splitting them doesn't work is because the reason people play Northern Reaches has nothing to do with Northern Reaches. It has everything to do with it's our PF2 game. And they want to play PF2. So if I made a PF2 game that featured a lot of character conflict, the 1s would still go and play that because they don't want to play the other game, which is no conflict, because it's a game system that they don't care about. So the problem is that people are just going to play the system that they want to play. Now, we could make 2 different PF2 games completely. But the problem there is now you're taking your player base and you're splitting in half. And mega games benefit from a critical threshold of players. And so instead of having 1 game with 60 people, you now have 2 games with, 20 or 30, and that's a lot weaker. So, So Zen, you run games with a lot of character conflict and log arguments, but nary an insult. Zen, I'm assuming that you're not running a game for 50 people, and I'm assuming that you're a GM who is overseeing all of this. Keep in mind that in these games, you have 50 plus players. They are talking to each other unmoderated, unmitigated. No GM is present. They're talking to each other in Discord. So there's, it's kind of a wild, wild west, kind of a bit of a frontier in that regard. Correct. Exactly, Jess. It's much more complicated than mature enough to keep it in the game. It's far more complicated than that. I think you, and especially someone who runs LARPs, knows that better than most people. Correct. We understand that not every game is for every person, right? I am totally fine with creating a game and it has this distribution, and we say, I'm sorry, if you're this people or you're these people, the game probably isn't for you. I'm okay, losing those extremes. But what if I say, hey, if you're one of these people, the game isn't for you. I think that's difficult because of the scale and size and shape of our games in particular. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Smendon, it does happen a lot. And thus the answer is play Wilderfeast instead. And the reason is because nobody wants to play that game. That means that the only people playing that game are playing that game because they want to play the mega game, not because they want to play the system. Right? We had a lot of people who played Dragontide, and the reason they played Dragontide is because they wanted to play Dragonbane. So they were going to play Dragontide regardless of what rules we made for the game, because they wanted to play Dragonbane. And thus, any rule that we had in there that kind of changed or updated or tweaked something that was in Dragonbane, they were kind of like, oh, I don't like this, but I'm going to keep playing the game anyways and tell you my, my issues, my criticisms, because I just want to I want to play Dragonbane. I'm interested in the system. This is the option to play Dragonbane a lot. So I'm going to play it. I would rather it just be literally probably straight up rules as written Dragonbane and not have any of this mega game crap, and I could just play. Honestly, what I would really rather have is just a campaign to play Dragonbane in, but that's not an option, so I'm going to play this instead. And because they really are passionate about Dragonbane. They're not passionate about Dragontide, they're passionate about Dragonbane. And I think there's a lot of people who, when we've had 4 seasons really, of Northern Reaches, and I think there's most people I think are passionate about Pathfinder 2. They are less passionate about Northern Reaches. Now, there are people who are definitely passionate about the game, but I'm just saying, I think most people, imagine if Reddit was your player pool, right? We have the advantage that at least our player population is, people who opt in and pay money, and there's a paywall. If it was just literally like an open source, oh my God, it would be unplayable. Just as I have friends I haven't gamed with in over a decade, because the last time we shared a table was when the GM asked my roommate and I to roleplay the Drow cohorts they picked up with a leadership game. That game ended with everyone dead except one Drow cohort and the 2 PCs with leadership. The attitude of bleed only happens to people who can't handle it and / are inexperienced is the number one toxic attitude any player can have about bleed. I tend to agree. Pumpkin says, I actually would want to play Wilderfeast, though. Correct. Right. I have a different issue as well, right? Which is that these people are paying money to play the game. I mean, again, look, I have patrons, and again, I understand it. I understand that everybody's here for different reasons. I do have financial motivation reasons. I have people in my community who have been signed up at my $25 a month level, and they have been there for 4+ years. They never on the Discord. They lurk. They don't play in anything. They've never used their tickets to get free T-shirts or stickers or anything. They just pay me $25 a month. They're happy to support me. But I also get people who sign up for $10 a month, which is what you have to pay to play Northern Reaches, which is our PF2 mega game. And they play that, and that they don't go to any other channel. And then when the PF2 season is over, they end their account, and then they come back when we kick it off again. So, I mean, there's different, some people view it as them paying a service. We've fallen into a mega game pit again. Yeah. Well, it's because it's something that we offer that is, I think it's a unique offering. A lot of people out there in the internet land, talk about games. I mean, I'm not the only person who reviews games. I'm not the only person who looks at games. I'm not the only person who gives GM advice. But the type of game that we're running, I think, is different than what other people are doing, and I think it's also a unique value add. It's a unique value add for our Patreon, because we run these mega games and they're not just 5e, right? And that's why people joke about, it doesn't reach, does it mega game? Because, we had PF2, and, now we're doing Dragonbane, and now it's like, oh, maybe we're going to do, Lancer, or maybe we're going to do some of these other games, So, and I do think that they are big. I mean, there was a time where Northern Reaches was like 75, 80% of the entire Patreon. So it's not anymore. Now we have close to 600 members, and Northern Reaches might have 50 to 60 people. So it's obviously not 75% anymore. It's just 10%. But so yeah, and I think it's just an interesting way to play games online, to take advantage of the online ecosystem, and especially when you're talking about games that aren't as popular as 5e. I think it's easier to try to get groups together if you try to create this big community which is running games all the time. But yeah, correct. It is a tough nut to crack for sure. But I was taking notes earlier about what, and again, we were talking, so reaches, right, Smendon. Then there's those people at $5 who are just there for the vibes. And you know what? Complete, that is fantastic. That is, I am more than happy for that. In fact, at the $5 tier, you get access to everything on the Discord except for the 2 mega games. So that is why I consider that the, kind of the base level. Squire was always designed to be sort of an introductory level, but, yeah. But, my only other option is, to like fucking, design a game, so, like, what am I going to do? Design a game? That sounds impossible and, never to be done. Also, to be complete, going back a step in complete transparency, one of the other reasons is I know me, and I know what kind of game I would create, and I know what kind of game would speak to me, and I know the kind of GM I am. If I thought for even a moment that I could design a game and it would end up looking like Cairn, okay, or it would end up looking like maybe even Nimble, which I think is on the kind of the longer end, or something like that. Maybe even Shadow Dark. If I thought for a minute that my game design would lead to something like, this, I would be much less afraid to engage with designing a game. But I know who I am, and I know what I like, and I know what I'm inspired by, and I know the games that motivate me, and I know what I tend to do with my design elements. It would not be a, whatever. What was Cairn? Like a 7-page rule book, So, Shadow Dark is just, each class is what? It's like size 50 font, and it's like each class is like facing pages, and one of those is like half a fold with art, and it's just like a random table with like 6 things on it. So again, it's cool. It's awesome. I mean, it's a beautiful book. I'm totally great for it. It's fantastic. But I know that if I designed a game, it would not look like this. In terms of size and depth and complexity. And this is just my thought process. The reason why Shadow Dark is this thick is the same reason why Karn got reprinted as Karn 2nd edition. And what is the real difference between Karn and Cairn 2nd edition? The rules are basically the same, but Cairn 2nd edition has like 100 more pages. Why does it have 100 more pages? The same reason Shadow Dark isn't a 20-page zine. It's just a bunch of random tables. Why are there a bunch of random tables in the book? This is, again, just my cynical thought process. Is it to help out the GMs with a really helpful all-in-one book? Maybe. Or is it so that they can justify, a $50, $60 price tag? You don't make a lot of money selling 7-page zines. That's just my take on it. Now, again, I'm being cynical. It's true. I am being cynical, but I think that is a real. I think that is a real thing. You don't do a Kickstarter for a 7-page zine, or for like for lasers and feelings. That's something you just post on itch.io and it's a PDF for $2.99. But, so I wish I could though, And again, there are people designing RPGs like that. John Harper has an entire list of them, all for free. Lasers and Feelings, Lady Bluebird, Mustang, Null Rails or whatever. What are they called? Null Jacks or whatever. I can't remember the name of the stupid game. I mean, there's a lot of them. Where's my Lasers and Feelings box set? Right, exactly. No, it's a World of Dungeons. How could I forget World of Dungeons? World of Dungeons is a 2-page PDF that's available for free. So John Harper isn't making any money off of that, and to the point of you pointing out the thing, honestly TTRPG designers are way too profit motivated. I think it's safer to say that people need money to survive. I think maybe that's another way to phrase that, Sweet Thread. Because as Jess says, the line between profit motivated and not needing to leave the industry in order to avoid homelessness is labeled inherited generational wealth. So you might have designers who have another source of income or another source of wealth or another source of this or that or this or the other thing. So, yeah. Sage Beowulf says, I know when I'm shopping for games, I skip anything less than 100 pages and prefer them to be at least 150. Anything less, and I don't feel like it'll have legs. So there you go. But, again, so I understand that people need to make money, which is fine. But, so. Derek says, you're crazy, Bayo. Yeah. Mythic Bastion Land, I think, is a good example of a very basic, of a very basic system that has essentially what is a bunch of tables. But to call these just simple Oracle tables, I think is underselling the care, consideration, design ethic, all the art that goes into it. So obviously I'm a big fan of Chris McDowell's work. He has somehow created a book that is almost 200 pages long, and even though the system is extremely simple, it feels like those pages are well earned. But the truth of the matter is, the rules of the game are on page 8, and they go to page 14. So, and then there's 154 pages of your knights and your myths. Not to mention one of the best GM advice sections in the entire entirety of the entire game I've ever seen, which is great. So, yeah, I might not tell you how far you can leap versus how far you can long jump if you don't have 150 pages. Right, exactly. Not to mention, when you do long jump, what is the maximum vertical distance that you reach while long jumping? Beowulf and people like him are the cause for unnecessary game bloat. Yeah. But I think Fantasy Craft did predate Pathfinder. So again, we talk about the efficiency and stuff like that of design and all this other stuff. And my general experience is that, the depth of the gameplay, at least, as derived from a mechanical thing, and then the complexity of the system tends to be asymptotic, which is to say that, diminishing returns. So, it starts off that as the complexity of the game gets greater, the depth of the gameplay goes up. But very soon this begins to plateau out, And so in order to go from this much depth of gameplay to this much depth of gameplay, which is more depth, it's an incremental amount of increased depth of play, but you had to increase the complexity of the game by an incredibly disproportionate amount. And so I think that, and on certainly some of the most, Baroque, Gothic, truly horrific looking games of all time sort of, live out in this domain. I'm not going to name names, but, what was that? The dark eye comes to mind. But yes, exactly. This is the juice. This is the juice versus squeeze graph. Yep, exactly. X-axis is squeeze, Y is the juice. And so I think a lot of game designers, they want to live, somewhere in this, in this space. But and this is why we also talk about efficiency of design. Because if you had a really efficient game design, your curve, right, might look like this. And so you could make your game here, right? You got a much higher depth of gameplay for the same amount of complexity. So given the choice between these two games, outside of any sort of, stylistic differences or genre differences, I think you would tend to pick, this one. But so this is what we call, the slope of this function, or the derivative of this function, the instantaneous derivative at any point of this function, is what we would call the efficiency function of that, particular design paradigm. It's the Euro games of RPGs, if you will. Yes. All the best games, most fun and most selling, have had at least 150 pages. Prove me wrong. I don't know about most fun, but in terms of best selling, probably. I mean, because D&D has had more than 150 pages. Although Beowulf, this game started a revolution. This is BXD&D. This is the book. And it has, including the index, 63 pages. So, you are wrong. And as far as I understand, this is still probably until maybe 5th edition. I think this is the best-selling D&D product of all time, is this box set. So, this one. If not this one, then the red box. This is called Magenta Box, also called BXD&D, also called Mold of a Cook D&D. What other books have great GM advice? I think Blaze in the Dark has fantastic. GM advice. I think the original Dungeon World by Sage Latora and Adam Cobell has fantastic game master advice. I think it's a great question. There's a couple books that I saw that I was really impressed with. I'd have to kind of go through and think about it, but those ones definitely jumped to my mind. I think, well, I don't know where it actually is. Where's Thirsty Sword Lesbians? This is the expansion to Thirsty Sword Lesbians, but this is Advanced Lovers and Lesbians. But Thirsty Sword Lesbian, oh, here it is. I think now it's still PBTA coded, but I think Thirsty Sword Lesbians has a really good GM advice section. Oh, another PBTA game. This game. This is a generic. This is kind of like a Dungeon World 2.0 that never was. This is called Fantasy World. This has really good GM advice. 4th edition DMG was mentioned. I agree that has really good. 4th edition DMG 1 and DMG 2 are both, I think, pretty good. Just looking here. Hackmaster? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. We'll go with that list off the top of my head. But yeah. Beowulf, does it have a monster manual? You mean, does this have a monster manual? Of course it does. Yeah. You got Medusas, giant frogs, ogres, naiads, robber fly, rust monsters, rock baboons, normal people, pixies, shadows, sturges, spiders, snakes. Got everything. It even has magic items. And it has an adventure. And it has a random dungeon generator. There you go. Pong started a revolution, but it's not exactly a yearly earner in 2025. That's true. Well, no, not really. B just means basic. X means expert. The basic, the game only went to level 5, I think. I think the character classes only went to level 5. I could be wrong about that number. They only went to level 3. Not that you got anything past level 3. Not that you really got anything past level 3. You just got more hit points. But X, expert, the blue box. I mean, you do if you want to go past level 3, technically. So, I mean, if you want to go past level 3, you do, because if you want spell, if you want fireball, you need to get the next book. Correct, Derek. That is the reason why basically the OSR is derived from that book. Yes, sort of, Zen Bullet. The answer is that they made, in 1981, you had basic and expert. And then they were going to do a third set, but instead in 83, they republished basic again. It's called the Red Box Basic. This is also known as Mensert Basic. And then you got the basic, expert, and he did 5 books, right? Companion, Master, and then the Immortal Rules. And that became known as BECME, which would later be sort of compendiumized and kind of re-edited by Aaron Allison in this, which is known as Rules Cyclopedia. So Rules Cyclopedia is basically just BECME kind of combined into one. And believe it or not, this is basic D&D. And on the back of this book, it says all the rules and the reason why I say almost is because they redid Immortals completely, and then they released a new box set. So really, RC is Beckham, and there's no I. And then they released this book called The Wrath of Immortals box set, which kind of redid the Immortals rule. Anyways, it says all the rules from D&D box basic sets. Guidelines to develop and play characters from levels 1 to 36. You see, people think D&D went to level 20, and it didn't. Even the original D&D didn't stop at level 20. People think it did, but it did not. The game kept going. So, in fact, I think the first version of D&D that maybe stopped at 20 was 3rd edition. But companion in the Merc sense? No, it just meant you're super high level. Like basic was 1 to 3, expert was like 4 to 14, companion was like 14 to 22, and this was like 23 to 36, and then immortal was like a whole separate thing where you became like a demigod. So that's true. That was an expansion, epic level handbook. You are correct. You are correct. Did anyone actually use the epic level handbook? Did anyone use it? I'm going to guess no, because that no one used that. We used it. We had one character who got to epic level technically, but no one I know actually used it. But like legitimately. All right. Thank you for the exact breakdown. I was pulling those out of my ass, but I was okay, I see that you used it, but did you actually use it? We had epic levels on my Neverwinter Night server. My rogue sorcerer Shadow Dancer was level 36 or something. I mean, look, ELH, I thought ELH was cool until, of course, Mythic Adventures came out. And then I was like, oh, shit, Mythic Adventures is legit. I much prefer Mythic Adventures. But oh, we got to 20th level all the time. We just usually were sick of it by then, and we would usually just call it. We didn't think the ELH game was that cool. What was some weird random poll here? Where's my polls? I'm trying to think of a good list of these. Favorite weird 3.x book. Epic level. Swords. PHP 2. I'm trying to think of if I know any of what's there we go. All right, that's a sufficiently good list, I think. All right, poll is coming up. What do I have a poll? Here we go. What was your favorite weird 3.x book? Epic level handbook, which is technically a 3.0 book, technically, actually. That's why I said 3.x. Book of Nine Swords, Player's Handbook 2, Tome of Magic, Magic of Incarnum, or Weapons of Legacy. People are like, what are these books? A lot of weird books came out. Let me just tell you. I have a feeling I know which one's going to win, but we got some votes for Tome of Magic. That's sick. Jake, why are you making me do this? Come on, what's going on? Update. I don't know why it's not updating. There it goes. Oh, the binder. Yeah, very cool. Well, that's Dr. Metropolis. That's why they had E6, right? That was the E6, right? Where you only got to 6th level. And then after you get to 6th level, you stop leveling up. And I think it was like what, every like 5,000 experience points or whatever, you got a bonus feat. So you only progressed horizontally at that point, not vertically. So, I'm surprised here at the Tome of Magic. No love for the weapons of no love for the weapons of legacy. Yeah, E6 was really cool. I mean, to be clear, we did an E6 in Pathfinder 1, and we still ended up like fighting multiple Baylors at the end of the campaign because we ended up having some sort of ridiculous broken world or broken characters anyways. So anyways, very cool. Yeah, Book of Nine Swords was, it's funny. Everyone says, oh, I love Book of Nine Swords. And I'm like, that's 4th edition D&D, man. I don't know what to tell you. It's 4th edition D&D. They were literally trying it out, In fact, a lot of those late 3rd edition books were basically them trying out stuff from 4th edition. I mean, one of the schools from Book of Nine Swords is called White Raven, and it's mostly warlord powers. And there are a number of warlord powers in 4th edition that are literally called something like blank blank White Raven, White Raven's Charge, White Raven's Tactics. They're literally named White Raven because they literally took it from Book of Nine Swords. White Raven Onslaught. See, yeah, I mean, it's very cool. But good stuff. But yeah. Well, we got 69 people here. I can't. I'm free to talk about anything else. Although it is 3:30, I'm not going to step too late. We are going to stream again, actually, really tonight. Vin's going to join me, and we're either going to talk about Dolmenwood, or we are going to talk about bonds and friendship. Mechanics in TTRPGs. What can we learn from Persona? Interesting. The 4E wizard soured him on it. Was it that because the 4E wizard wasn't like overpowering and could just completely delete encounters at will? Vin says, "Oh, chat poll. All right, we can do a chat poll. Hopefully, it was working. It seemed like the chat poll was kind of not working here. You know what I'll do? I'll use a YouTube. I don't think I'm even on Twitch. Tonight's actual stream: Dolmenwood or Power of Friendship." All right. Everybody vote. Poll is up. We do have 69. He liked the options for 3.5 wizard. He didn't like being a controller. Okay, fair enough. I loved Magic Missile requiring a roll. And I'm a traditionalist in that way, but I mean, I loved having. And then they changed it to appease people with essentials, and I absolutely hated it, and it was terrible, and blah 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 blah. And rituals were amazing, and anybody could cast rituals. Sure, wizard got the feat for free. I think so did cleric. But anybody, a fighter, could take could take the feat, ritual magic, and then pick up some skills, which you could do because it was just trained or not trained. There was no skill progression in 4th edition. And then they would have a ritual book, and they could add rituals to their ritual book, and they could cast. People don't even understand how cool 4th edition was. And that's the worst part. If you truly knew the game and you hated it, I could respect that. But like so many people are just do not understand what 4th edition was, because they either played with a absolutely horrible GM or DM, which is true. Most DMs are terrible. We all know this. Or they heard about it on, EN World or Dragon's Foot or whatever the fuck back then. And they just shot, and they were like, oh, I play Pathfinder 1 because it's cool, because it's the 3rd edition, fuck WotC or whatever. It was like the original version of the OGL. Anyways, that makes me upset. We don't talk about essentials. I mean, except to say it sucked. I issued a public apology to D&D 4E, but to be honest, I'm still not over ending the Blood War and making the succubus a devil. The succubus makes so much more sense as a devil. She is a manipulator and controller. They're not even remotely close to demonic and chaotic. She is literally using seduction as a technique. It is so in 4th edition they made succubus a devil, which she should have been the entire time. Like when I think of a succubus, I think of somebody serving Asmodeus or Mephistopheles or Batazu or whatever, not someone serving Orcus. That doesn't even make sense. Vin says, wow, no one here gives an F about Dolmenwood. No, we never looked at Dolmenwood. Dolmenwood just came out, so we did not look at Dolmenwood. Well, to be clear, we're looking at a couple of different things. I mean, there's Dolmenwood, the system, which is BXD&D. It's OSE, which makes sense, right? It's from Exalted Funeral. I mean, I'm sure they change it up. But the other thing about Dolmenwood, which I think looks absolutely incredible, is its beautiful dark fairy campaign setting and its really detailed sort of regional hex crawl system, which I think looks really cool. So I do think there's something there to be seen. In fact, we are definitely going to look at Dolmenwood for sure. And I think it's worthy of it. And I think it could potentially be, a product of the year next year at the Ennies, because I do think it's really, really cool. Well, the other thing you have to remember is that, they did completely change the world cosmology, right? So now the Abyss was below the elemental chaos. It's a 4th edition lore drop time. Okay, so as people know, in the original, what is known as the Great Wheel cosmology, okay, you have the outer planes, okay? And the outer planes are in a great wheel of, you guessed it, alignments. They go around in a big circle. And in the middle is what is known as the plane of concordant crossroads, but it's sometimes called Outland in Planescape. But it is the plane of super neutrality. And around the circle, you've got, the 7 heavens of lawful good. And then over here, you've got the super evil, chaotic evil abyss, which is where the demons live. And then over here, you have lawful evil. And, you have chaotic neutral, Gehenna, and all this other stuff. And you might say, oh, so there's 9 planes? No, because they also had so you had lawful good, and then you also had lawful neutral, but then you also had lawful neutral good, and then you also had neutral lawful good, right? There was all these different levels. They had gradients of the 9 alignment systems, okay? So these are the outer planes. And then this is connected by the magical starry realm of the astral plane, okay, to the material plane. And the material plane was this infinite realm of space, and you had all these prime material worlds where, characters went and lived their adventures. And hey, look, it's Torel and it's Kryn and all these other games, okay? Now, separate from all of this, okay, there was another transient plane that overlapped with the material plane called, you guessed it, the ethereal plane, okay, which was like the astral plane, but ooh, it's misty and smoky and nobody knows what's going on. And the ethereal plane gets completely different. The ethereal plane connected to, yes, the elemental planes. Okay, so then you had the plane of fire. And of course, like anything else, they were in a ring. So you had, I'm going to try to draw this because it's I have to draw it three-dimensionally. Okay. Okay, so you had fire and earth and water and air. But you also had positive and you had negative. And guess what? In between, you had the para-elemental planes. And then in between, so like between fire and earth, you had the plane of magma. Okay. And then between earth and water, you had the plane of ooze. Okay. And between the water and air, I think you had ice. And between air and fire, I honestly don't remember what you had between air and fire. Was it smoke? Might have been smoke. Could have been ash. Might have been smoke. But wait, those are the para-elemental planes. Okay. Then between the elemental planes and the positive, and between the elemental planes and the negative, you had steam. Okay. You had what? These were the para, and then you had the quasi-elemental planes. Okay. So between fire and positive, you had radiance. Okay. And between like air and negative, you had vacuum. And everybody's favorite plane of all time, between earth and negative, you had the quasi-elemental plane of, you guessed it, salt. And by the way, what were these planes? You guessed it, an infinite expanse in X, Y, and Z dimensions, completely filled with that element. Okay? Like literally, if you could imagine an infinite block of salt going in all directions, that was the plane of salt. Same with the plane of earth, but less salt. Now, okay, if earth and negative is salt, what is earth and positive? That's right, mineral. I can't believe I remember these things. I think air and positive is a quasi-elemental plane of lightning, as if that was even a thing. Correct. It was incredibly useless to adventure in, and it served absolutely no point whatsoever. And so, anyways, and I'm trying to even remember what water and negative was. I don't even remember now. That one I don't remember. I honestly don't remember water and negative. Okay, so believe it or not, that was ooze. Okay, so then what was earth and water? In the what was the para-elemental plane? Anyways, it doesn't matter. Point is, mud maybe? Yeah, maybe. This is the Great Wheel Cosmology, and it's not great. It's actually kind of terrible. So, instead, in 4th edition, they remade it. So, you have the material plane where the world is. And they don't really get into this idea of like crystal spheres and all these other different worlds. The idea is that there's like one, there's like one universe. There's one, there's not multiple universes. There's one material plane, okay? And then above it is the planes above. And then there are the planes below. Now the difference is that the planes above, okay, which is the astral sea, is a glittering, glowing expanse, and it is full of the gods' domains. Good, evil, the gods, okay, rule their domains above. Below is the elemental chaos. And instead of having a bunch of different planes of infinite salt, the elemental chaos is described as a sort of, twisting world of rocks and fire and negative, or rocks and fire and water and earth, and it's totally, you can breathe air there. There's islands of earth that you can jump around on. You can just imagine it's like spinning chaos, creating. It's just, basically it's very chaos coded, and the planes above is very law coded. And then at some point at the dawn of civilization, or the dawn of the world, someone, a god who is not to be named, planted at the very bottom of the elemental chaos a shard of ultimate darkness and evil. And it grew in the belly of the world of creation, and it created basically almost a black hole of evil. Okay? And that is the abyss. That is where demons come from. So demons are corrupted elementals in the 4th edition cosmology. And what's cool is in the 4th edition cosmology, like, for example, hell is in the astral sea. It is in the planes above. Heaven is in the astral sea, in the planes above. Angels are just the servants of the gods. Okay? Then in our sort of material plane here in the middle, right? Here's our material plane in the middle. You have a bright reflection where everything is turned up too bright, and that is the Feywild. Okay? And then you have a reflection of the world where everything is sort of, where the volume is turned down, right? Where the brightness is turned down. Okay? And that is the Shadowfell. And again, the Feywild and the Shadowfell are basically like mirror universes of the world. So like there's analogs, right? Like when you go from the material world to the Shadowfell, like the geography is still kind of the same, but everything is dark and lifeless, and instead of a vibrant forest, it's sort of a bunch of dead trees or whatever like that. So things are the same, but they're different. It's like a darker reflection of the world. And the same thing with like the Feywild. The Feywild is just like everything's turned up to 11. And, in the real world, there's a waterfall. But in the Feywild, it's a glittering crystal waterfall that's, 1,000 feet tall. And so everything is just really bright. But the key is all of these planes are adventurable. They're not just like, oh, it's an infinite expanse of lawful good, or, oh, it's an infinite expanse of steam. Oh, it's an infinite expanse of salt. And that's it. This is the 4th edition cosmology, and it's fucking great because it's all totally playable. It's totally usable. And it's really, really cool. And it's really great. Right. So Dr. Metropolis. So Dark Sun was in 4th edition. Okay. And for those of you who know Dark Sun, okay, what happened in the lore of 4th edition, the planes above is the domain of the gods, and the elemental chaos is the domain of the Titans. And the Titans basically were elemental lords, and they, obviously were kind of chaotic in nature. And the gods, right, worship people. And in the beginning of time, the gods and the Titans fought, very, Greek mythology inspired, in what was called the Dawn War. And the idea in the 4th edition game is that the gods won, and that the earth and then the primal spirits of the earth got involved and basically banished the gods from being able to directly influence the world, because they didn't want the world to be the battleground between these. But the Titans were banished to the elemental chaos, and the gods won, which is why divine power and religion is sort of the name of the game. And elementals are kind of bad guys in 4th edition. But in Dark Sun, where everybody knows there are no gods and the world is kind of harsh and cruel and unsuitable for living, in the Dark Sun world, the Titans won that Dawn War. And so the gods were basically killed and cut off from the material world. And the power of the elemental chaos, right? The elements turned to 11, right? Making it very inhospitable for living creatures, sort of took over. And so that basically explains Dark Sun in the 4th edition cosmology. And that's why in 4th edition in Dark Sun, the idea is just that the gods lost that war. And because Athos now is sort of ravaged by those, chaotic elemental spirits, you have this, pretty harsh world with these really extreme temperatures and really extreme living conditions, because the elemental chaos is sort of bleeding through in all of its glory. Oh, I absolutely love the hell in the Astral Sea. For number one, I mean, hell was always part of the Astral Sea. If you wanted to get to hell in the Great Wheel cosmology, you had to pass through the astral plane, and there's hell. There's the 9 hells. So you had to go through the astral plane and go to hell. So the astral plane was always involved with going to hell. So, and theoretically speaking, hell was, just down the block from heaven. Hell wasn't even opposite heaven, right? Because hell is lawful evil and heaven was lawful good. Technically, hell was opposite chaotic good plane. Is that Bitopia? No. Arcadia? Hell, heaven is opposite the abyss. So I'm trying to think what was the chaotic good plane. Was it Arcadia, Bitopia, Elysium? No, I think maybe it was Elysium. These were all planes, by the way. No one knows any of them. Well, the main reason is that hell is ruled by a god or a goddess. And anything that's ruled by a god or a goddess is a astral domain. So that's what they were in 4th edition. Cal says, this is some sweet lore. Holy shit. Yeah. I mean, 4th edition was really good. So they retconned the defiling magic ruining the world. Yeah, kind of, I think. Or they made it so that the elemental magic destroyed the world basically instead, which is still kind of the same thing. One question, why do you still have on this in your head? I don't know. Because I'm a nerd and I love D&D. So Pumpkin says, no, defiling magic still ruined Athos. Yeah, it was still defiling magic, but there you go. It's implied that the gods forsaking the world created a sort of spiritual malaise that allowed defiling to occur. And Jake, yes, Nentir Vale is one of the greatest quote unquote campaign settings that isn't really a campaign setting of all time. So everything about 4th edition was designed. The thing about 4th edition is, and this is what people hate about it, 4th edition was designed for gameplay. And I don't just mean the mechanics of like what your fighter can do. So that way your fighter and your wizard actually have the same, power level and can adventure together in a meaningful way. I mean, every element of the game, from the monsters to the world, to the lore, to the way that everything was set up, it was designed to make it easy to play. It was designed so that it made the most sense. It fit in with the mechanics. It fit in with the way that people were using D&D to play games. It was designed to be usable. And that's a great way to put it. Yeah, 4E is a game meant to be played, not a game that's meant to be a lifestyle brand. I agree with that. But again, it's like the lore fits the way that people play D&D. Like, for example, this is a great example. I've talked about this before. If you know your Forgotten Realms, the whole idea of the points of light concept in 4th edition is this idea is that, the world was once this great, thank you, the Snorlax is calling. Arcadia is the chaotic good plane. Bitopia is the lawful neutral good. And Elysium is the chaotic neutral good. Thank you, Jess. Thank you so much. So the idea of points of light is you once had this great realm and it collapsed, right, into darkness, which means that the world is full of monsters and ruins full of treasure. And you have a handful of points of light, right, which could be, they don't have to be good. It's just civilization. It's towns, it's structure. And everything else is kind of wild, making it ideal for adventures. When you contrast this with, say, Forgotten Realms, it's like, okay, well, here's Waterdeep, which is a metropolis with like 1 million people in it and like, you know, multiple Chosen of Mistras and, you know, multiple high-level characters. But if you go right down the road, it's like, well, here's Neverwinter. And then if you go right down the road, it's like, here's Luskan. And then if you go right down the road a little bit, it's like, here's Baldur's Gate. And if you go a little bit to the northeast, it's like, okay, here's Silvery Moon, which fucking has a mithril. Sorry, it has a mythal. Not to mention, also, it also has a Chosen of Mistra, who's like the leader of it. It's like, okay, so here's Silvery Moon. And it's like, okay, where exactly is the wilderness? Where exactly is the adventure? Why am I going and doing anything? Why isn't one of the many 20th level demigod characters that live in any one of these number of cities taking care of these things? Not to mention, you go into other places of the world. It's like, if you go to like, let's see if this is Waterdeep. Let's see, like Silvery Moon. It's like Honorok is like here. And so like, you go to here, it's like, okay. And then it's like, here is like the Sea of Fallen Stars. And it's like, okay, here's Cormyr. And like Cormyr is like a completely civilized feudal kingdom with like a completely operating structure of monarchy. Like this is like a nation state. It's not there's not like an unexposed wilderness area there. Hell, the fucking desert has an ancient civilization hanging out there, So I love the realms. But like the realms, it's like there's no need. We don't need adventurers, It's all the problems should be solved. Anyways, 4th edition made it so that, correct. And, you're like, okay, well, what if we keep going north? It's like, okay, well, then you get to the 10 towns and it's like, infinite heroes up there. You got Mithril Hall. You've got Citadel Abbar. You've got somewhere in here, you've got like Nesme and Long Saddle. I mean, there's just towns everywhere. I mean, it's just like so many towns everywhere in the Forgotten Realms. Right. It's the Elminster problem. Exactly. Right. And every innkeeper is a level 14 fighter. And that was not the case in 4th edition. So that was pretty cool. Is Faerun fully mapped out? Yeah. I think so. Because, I mean, you have Icewind Dale up here. And then, let's see, you have Icewind Dale up there. And then that goes down to like Calimshan. And then that like loops around to like Chult. And then you have like Halrua over here. And like Luria. And then I don't know what's over here. I actually don't know what's in the southeast. I think that goes to like Al-Qadim. I think that goes to Al-Qadim. And if you go like far, far to the east, I think that leads to Karatur. And then if you go up to the northeast, this is where you get to like the Great Glacier. And I think that's like truly inhospitable. It's literally just a fucking glacier. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically, yeah. I mean, if you go far enough east and southeast, you eventually get to a different campaign setting entirely. So there's that. Oh, right. Yeah, Maztica is over here. But I think Maztica is supposed to basically be like the new world. I think. Also, not many people know this, but did you know that Faerun, a.k.a. Torel, has its own version of Valinor? That's right. Out here in the middle of the ocean, there's an island. It's called Evermeet. And it's where in Faerun, by the way, technically all the elves are supposed to be leaving Faerun. It's called The Return. And they are leaving to go live in Evermeet. That is actually a thing in Faerun. I don't know if that ever comes up in any of the lore nowadays, but elves are not really supposed to be around anymore. In fact, that's why if you go into the Dale Lands, they left Cormanthor, which was their great kingdom. It's all abandoned, and they gave it over to the humans because they all just left and went to the. Yes. Well, no, the difference is that the high elves in Warhammer always lived in Ulthuan. They never left, Well, 4th edition fucked up everything. Everything I just told you was true in 3rd edition and 2nd edition D&D. I have no idea what's true in 5th edition anymore. But in 4th edition D&D, they fucked it up completely. So, as you can see, I actually know a fair amount about Forgotten Realms because I love it, and it's really cool. Yeah, Spell Plague... I love 4th edition. What it did to Forgotten Realms was a crime. So there is that. To be sure, it was a crime against humanity, a crime against everything. But yeah, I mean, some of my favorite. I mean, people talk about the Forgotten Realms, and all they know now is like they only know this. They just know Sword Coast, Sword Coast, Sword Coast, Sword Coast, Sword Coast, and I think there's so much cooler areas of things of Faerun. Can you explain what's so wrong with the Spell Plague stuff? I mean, they basically just retconned the entire world. Did you play World of Warcraft? It's like what they did in Cataclysm, where they like changed all the zones and they made them kind of lame and weak. But they made them lame and different, and they completely changed the world to make it fit D&D 4th edition. And to be fair, they did that before. It was called the Avatar Crisis, and it happened from 1st edition to 2nd edition, but it was a lot less painful. And 3rd edition, believe it or not, they just completely ignored it. But the Spell Plague was just really, 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 really awkward and weird. And they had to introduce a bunch, because D&D 4th edition had Dragonborn. Well, Dragonborn as a core playable race. Well, Dragonborn had never been a core playable race in D&D before. So if it's in Forgotten Realms, if it's in D&D, it has to be in Forgotten Realms. So they basically were like, yeah, the Dragonborn, they came in from another dimension. And TLDR, up until that point, this is all retcon. The name of the world was Abir Torel. That's the name of the planet that Faerun is just a continent of. Okay, so this is Faerun. What they said in 4th edition is that it's actually 2 different planets that were split. One is called Torel, which is the planet that you know, and then the other one is called Abir, which was a different planet. And then because of this, because I think Mystra died again or something, because of the Spell Plague, the worlds dimensionally shifted and combined, and so like it radically changed the geography, and all of these new races came flooding in to Faerun, and it was just like it was okay, but it ruined just all the years of history, and it was very heavy-handed. It was like super heavy-handed, like ridiculously heavy-handed, and they did other stupid stuff like. One of the defining features of Faerun is the Sea of Fallen Stars, right? The inner sea. And they in the Spell Plague, they drained it. And so some of the coolest, greatest cities, all the cities of the Vilhan Reach were now sitting on dry land. So you had all these cities that were just no longer, all the water basically just, they just got rid of all the water. And it's just, yeah, they made it playable, but at great cost. It was just terrible. But yeah. So Zen says, it got swept back in 5th edition. So they got rid of that in Spell Plague, but never explicitly detailed. Really, nothing outside of the Sword Coast is officially in 5th edition, which is crazy. So I like the Forgotten Realms, but you don't like it because it's too settled. Exactly, Cal. I think it's a really cool, world that has a really neat, made-up, pretend history and lore. But from, a D&D adventuring perspective, it doesn't really make any sense. I love it. I think it's cool, but it doesn't make any sense, especially not the Sword Coast. Like if you're going to adventure in the Forgotten Realms, you need to go someplace other than the fucking Sword Coast. That's for sure. Oh, that's cool. You get some Moon Sea stuff. Moon Sea is really cool. Moon Sea is fun. What's your take on Golarion? I mean, Golarion was always a kitchen sink setting, and I wasn't a huge fan of it. So it was always pretty kitchen sinky. I never really liked it. And I think it got even more kitchen sinky in second edition for sure. Of course I saw the tangent, or of course I saw the trailer, but I am curious to see how they'll do it and how it'll actually play out. I'm hesitant. I'm more excited about Dawn of War 4 because they're going back to like real RTS. They're going back to large armies, larger supply caps, hundreds of units or at least dozens and dozens of units, base building. So Dawn of War 4 is going to be really, really cool. And I think Dawn of War 1 is one of the greatest games of all time. Cool. Sequel to Pool of Radiance. That's neat. Tyrandraxxus in Flan. Let's see if we can do it from memory. Okay, Moon. Oh, that's not it. All right, let's do it from memory. Let's see if we can do it. All right, we've got the Moon Sea. It's like kind of like that. So like Flan is like here. And like maybe Zentel Keep is here. And maybe Mole Master is here. And like Daggerford is like here. And there's a city over here, but I can never remember what city it is. All right, that's all I can remember from the Moon Sea. But Moon Sea is really cool. You're just going to delete a month of your life. I mean, I'll play it. Tyrandraxxus. Yes, very cool. Correct. And I hated Dawn of War 2 completely for that reason, for sure. Because I like RTSs. I don't like hero hammer, hero RTS, whatever they call it, hero time strategy or whatever like that. It's the same reason why I never really got into what do they call it? MOBAs. MOBAs, I thought I just never liked. I didn't want to just control one, or I didn't want to just control a small handful of hero units. I wanted to control a bunch of cool stuff. Anyways, all right, folks, it's 4 a.m. and I'm going to be streaming later tonight. So thank you for this random walk down completely, totally tangent lanes. Enjoyed it. We covered so much. Look at all this. Look at all this lovely stuff. We covered combat as sport board games, why the fundamentals of D&D change with experience points. How does this relate to GNS theory, the birth of 5th edition and how it was a mea culpa. We talked about the history and the lineage of D&D and OD&D, how random encounters and random procedural generation create gamist versus simulations and which one's a better thing. Variance in mega games and the problems that it generates. We talked about the history of Northern Reaches and the front origins. We talked about player conflict. We talked about depth versus breadth for complexity. Voted for Dolmenwood or Power Friendship. Power Friendship won. The lineage of D&D basic, the cosmology of the Great Wheel, the cosmology of 4th edition, the Dawn World, and then we talked about Forgotten Realms. So there you go. As always, a wonderful example of Knights of Last Call. So we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call, which will be later today.